Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman, and we do have a Word Diary live with Alexey Arestovich. Good evening, Alexey. Good evening, Nikolai. All right, let's start with the Munich conference. I want to understand what do you think, whether it's Munich conspiracy or Munich divorce in the West between the United States and European Union. Well, of course it is a divorce, Nikolai. Tell me please then, Alexey, in the role, in the capacity of the divorcee from the European Union, that fellow Huisgen who was crying during his speech at the end of it, do you think this is an expression of futile European subjectivity, probably underlining that there is no European subjectivity at the current time? You know, Nikolai, 3 years ago, I published a video when 3 years ago he was laughing at the words of Trump. Alexey, eight years, right, okay. In a previous cadence, when Trump was saying that you guys will hit some very hard times if you follow the same vector. But of course it did not scare those brave and far-seeing knights who created this Munich conference. Today they're crying. And that reminds me of another interesting episode that is developing in a country that starts with a U and ends with a crane. Oh, right, this is an unknown country. Don't know what it is, right, Alexey? Indeed, Nick, this is probably a country somewhere in Through the Looking Glass fairy tale world. But since I do love this country a lot, and moreover, I actually gave an oath, an officer's oath to this country. So, on the rights of, how should I put it? Somebody who loves it? Right, somebody who loves the country, his motherland. I want to say that, you know, everybody, or a lot of people in the country and the office of the president were laughing for the last few years. And now they're starting to cry. And I was mostly crying the last 3 years, and now I'm starting to smile. So the roles are changing. And what can I say here? There are two Wests now, very different. They're quite different. Vance gave them a message in Europe, how different they are, why they're different, and where are they going with all the difference. Basically, summing it up, one can say that the right in America is making friends with the right in Europe, and the left on both sides of Atlantic are making friends too, or keeping together. But again, if you look at the West at large, let me ask you this. German National Socialism, is it West? It is West. Italian fascism, is it West? Of course it is. Liberal democracy, is it the West? United States, of course it is West. Constitutional monarchy, that's also the West. United Kingdom. De Gaulle partisans in France at the Second World War, of course this is West too. The Army Krajowa and Army Ludowa in Poland, are they West? Western armies shooting each other? And by the way, Karl Marx, with his Marxism, was also technically not from the East. And Soviet Union was also part of the West in different times, affecting it in different ways. The thing is that since the 1990s, there was a big temptation to present it under the umbrella of liberal democracy, that the West is united. And Vance comes to Europe and says that America is not liberal democracy anymore. And Vance has an ideological teacher, Patrick Denham, an American Catholic, an American ideologist of conservatism in the country. He wrote a very well-known book in the West about the end of liberalism. And recently he was giving an interview and said that Vance has two very good features. First, he is not thinking in the categories of Cold War. Black and white, Russia is bad, West is good, China is bad, West is good. And second, as a Catholic, as a practicing Catholic who went through rather rigorous studies, he is thinking about common well-being, about the common good. So in Trump's administration, therefore, we have three different groups. One is scientific technological progress, Elon Musk. Second is Trump, normal geopolitical business as usual. And Vance from the angle of common good, new meritocracy, new society, new republicanism, new conservatism. That is Vance. They all differ. And they do have a lot of points where they do not agree with each other. But they're united with the same rejection of the leftist agenda in any fashion or form. And Vance, in his speech before the divorce with Europe, had given them a lot of bitter truths that they should have gotten 5 years ago, but they were said now. So it happens now that the abandoned party in the divorce is crying, but it's too late. So from now on, you could see last week in Europe, there was a force majeure meeting of presidents of the countries, of the heads of executive power with Macron. They're all rushing and trying to figure something out, hustling and bustling. And I'm looking at that and smiling. Well, listen, Alexey, we were talking about basically the subjectness of Europe. And Vance is telling them, you guys have to deal with your own defense capabilities, with your own industry, with your own ability to be an individual subject in the world history that can stand for itself. And we've been talking about these same things in our streams. We've been observing it, we've been talking about that. These all problems stem from the crisis in European subjectness. And to describe it, we can say that President Zelensky basically is asking Europe to give him 300 millions that are arrested, $300 billion worth of Putin's money, Russia's money. Why Europe doesn't want to give it to Zelensky, we understand, right? Because, we'll probably steal half of it and only half of it will be used in some productive capacity. But what's the problem with the EU to confiscate this money and, give Ukraine the proceeds of using them and be the guardian of the confiscated amount? And now they are saying, how come that Putin will not be punished for his aggression at this Munich conference? I don't see why is it not a solution to arrest Putin's money, Russia's money overseas, and then use that percentage, the proceeds of that money, for their own military-industrial complex. But I want to say that I think they cannot do it because they don't have enough balls, and they don't have enough subjectness. Right, Nikolai. I saw another funny comment today. Somebody compared that saying, we're seeing how 500 million Europe is asking 350 million Americans to defend them from 150 million Russians, which are currently being stopped by 27 million Ukrainians. This is absolute nonsense. Because Europe, by its population, is bigger than the United States and Ukraine combined. And yet they're running around and asking for somebody to protect them. This is quintessential formula of how Europe lived since 1945. They concluded an ideal deal with the United States. You are protecting us. We will not be spending as much as you do. We'll be spending this money that we save on our infrastructure, on health bills and everything else. And then they come to Americans about 50 years later saying, well, listen, you guys suck. Your education is poor, your medicine is horrible, your social standards are subpar. Look at us in Europe, how fantastic we are there. And I want to say that Americans were rather naive, rather polite, and while they were busy fighting the Cold War with Soviet Union, they probably were not, it was not in their focus to say, what the F? You're building the paradise on our own money while we're spending money to defend you, and you have the audacity to criticize us and then tell us to follow your example. Now, what those Ukrainians who live around the president's office on Bankova 9, who work there, they like doing the following thing. They like coming to negotiations and kicking the door in and saying, guys, you don't understand shit in the world politics. First, we need $300 billion of Putin and 150 billions of your aid. In small bills, a helicopter and a song that we order. And if you don't provide that, we will continue criticizing you. And we'll criticize you now. You're idiots and you don't understand anything. Only we know how to live, what to do, who Putin is, and you don't understand anything about this life. That's why you owe us all that, and you need to give us money, and we'll tell you where, how, and when. So in this regard, we're true Europeans in relation to the United States. The thing is, the United States could tolerate Europe for 50 years, and they tolerated Ukraine for 3 years. And now they're done with both, with us and with Europe, with such an approach. And Vance comes to the meeting, looks around and says, guys, you're not West anymore. That's how he started. You're not West. And when they ask him, what are we? He's saying, well, I don't know. You look very much like USSR because you built your political system on the disruption of the feedback loop from your electors, from people. And that's it. Mikhail Khodorkovsky came out later in a different speech and said that there is an opinion in the Western politology that if parliament represents less than 95% of people in public groups, that can possibly lead to a civil war or civil conflict, and managing the country will not be successful. Vance did not quote him, but they both were talking essentially about the same thing. And they're saying that a significant part of your population, from a third to a quarter, maybe sometimes 10%, that are disconnected from the levers of power. And you are in a very precarious position. What I'm teaching in my courses to my students, when you're ready to really argue with somebody, is not when you are full of rage and ready to go and fight. But the criteria is different, not that. Criteria is when you can present your opponent's position better than he can do it himself. More logically, more sequentially, heavier, and more brilliantly described, so that your opponent would be actually pleasantly surprised with the depth of your knowledge. That is when you're ready for an argument and a dialogue. This is not only about life, this is also about politics. In politics, you should not be hiding from anybody. You should be listening to everybody, to all your constituents. You should be giving everybody a podium and an option to present their point of view. Every time, the moment you don't do that, you weaken your position. And I'll tell you a little proverb. Those who can read Latin, you can go to the site of Vatican and read the protocols of interrogation of Giordano Bruno. He was a Dominican monk, and even on his obelisk in Rome, he is dressed as a Dominican monk. He was forgiven 3 times, and because it was actually supposed to be a serious violation that he was going through, and only finally, after the complaint of civil powers, he was sent to be investigated by his order. And it was done by the order only because he is a monk, not because he did some theological crimes. So reading these records, you can see that he is complaining that his bed sheets were not changed for a week, and the wine is not what he likes, and the meat is only given him twice a week. So he's upset. It's a protocol. One of the protocols on one pager, it says that, and by the way, the interrogation went for 8 years. So somewhere in the middle of it, on the 4th year, one of the protocols has it. The interrogator says, on page 527 on the 4th volume of your writings, you say 1, 2, and 3. And he's asking, oh, did I say that? And the interrogator says, yeah, you did. That's in your book. And he's asking them, how do you know? You're not even having the book open. Well, we do not have to, because we studied them by heart. And that's when Giordano is asking them, why did you do that? Why do you know my works better than I do? And the head of the court, the head of the Inquisition, is answering him that, you see, Giordano, if the church, the Holy Church, has an enemy such as yourself, that means something is wrong with us. And that's why we want to understand you so well, to understand what is wrong with us. And this is the main principle that I think should be wielded both in public life and in politics. If I see a certain caliber of enemies, I need to understand, why do they exist? What is wrong with me? What was Europe and what was that global US aid doing for the last 15, 20 years? They've been trampling upon anybody who did not agree with them. Actually, in a rougher methods than Soviet Union at the end of it, before it collapsed. And that's why Vance on this speech is saying, you guys are so different and you look so much like USSR that I don't know if we can follow the same path. Moreover, he says that you guys have detached yourself from your roots. You lost your position, you lost your self-ID. You don't need a threat from Russia or China, you have your own internal threats. You're afraid to look your truths in the eyes, and you're afraid to look in the eyes of problems of migrants and other issues that are destroying you. And until you give the right to vote back to everybody, and you stop censoring groups of your population, you will turn into that very pale creature. And then, again, figuratively speaking, I'm saying, he paused and said, you are that creature. You are that golem. And looking at all that, I understand that Ukraine is Europe. We were doing everything almost like the carbon copy of the leftist Europe. However, there is also the right flank Europe, the right range of politics. We already have 7 countries where it is more prominent. And Trump's plan is to turn Europe into a smaller version of very toothy West, very capable of self-defense West. And with this, even the anthropological models of both vectors of civilizational development for these sides are different. So there will be a serious conflict between the left and the right in Europe in the foreseeing future. Same as in the United States, by the way. But we do have to deal with 2 Wests now, at least. If we're not looking at New Zealand and Australia, for example, and we do not take very westernized South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, the ones who are also part of collective West, frankly speaking. But they are also more leaning towards the right, to traditional. That's why a big question is, what do we want to deal with? Which kind of Europe, which kind of United States? And we can see the answer. President Zelensky announced diplomatic war to Trump and Vance and all these. It is very obvious. His recent statement was about what? That, okay, meeting in Saudi Arabia, we do not accept it. Even if I'm invited, I will not be participating. And that's what he declared publicly. So the spot of Zelensky's administration is understood in this conflict. Where is the place for Ukraine? And here we have another collision. With all my personal dislike of Zelensky and the fact that I can tell a lot of interesting things about him, but I'm holding myself, I do like that he's defending Ukraine right now. And he's defending our natural resources, does not allow America to just grab them how they like, when it's a forced deal. So that's fantastic. But my question is, how is he going to protect that in the long run? Just by bravery and the public statements? Alexey, why do you consider this deal to be a pushover? Well, the way it is described, we're supposed to give 50% to some people who will be appointed by American companies, and will need to give 50% of profits from all the mineral resources, natural resources. As the author of this article is writing, this is worse than Germany, the reparations that Germany had to pay after the Second World War. We don't know whether the contours of this deal are such, because we only have one publication. And it's not a good story, but we would want to know more about it. And frankly, if they, according to what we know, they tried to pressure Ukraine to signing this deal within an hour, you have to read all the text. And I'm glad that Zelensky resisted and was not forced into signing something that he was not ready, where we did not have time to understand and read and figure it out. But the next question is, how are you going to resist in the long term if America cuts off your aid? All right, Alexey, let me follow through here. President Zelensky gives an interview to Reuters, a famous interview where he's showing things on a map. Here are our natural resources. This is 1, this is 2. And he's being asked, what are the contours of the deal? What is the subject of the deal? And he's saying, well, okay, United States, and I'm not representing that verbatim, but it sounded like this as I understood it. So United States is our main partner, and they're basically saying that they want the right of the first night. We want, as partners, to share it with them 50-50, and it is his thesis. After this speech that he did, they came back to Ukraine and essentially offered him his conditions that he voiced before. So one can ask here, why did he talk about these terms before? Most likely, Nikolai, it was like this. He was given an offer of 50-50. Do you think 50-50 is honest? Or, by the way, 75-25 would be more honest. I think any deal is honest, right? If you accept it, that ends up being an honest deal. So if you shake hands, this is honest. And I think he at first was very pleasantly surprised because he wanted to trade his own position together with this deal. But when he later understood that he is not being given his personal security or reinforcement of his position, he cannot take this deal, and he's resisting now. The problem is that his resisting shtick broke a while ago during this time, because he had huge symbolic capital in the world, in the United States. In Ukraine, he had all the power, mono-majority, full support of his people, and now it has been drained down the toilet by his methods of rule. And he essentially took away all the weapons and all the armor that he had against that big bulldozer that he announced to be a monster who wants to devour Ukraine. And before that, he also promised, I guess, when Monster was still offering how to negotiate and was trying to promise something. So he changed that all to that current tune. So problem is that he's very stubborn now, and he doesn't have any tools to continue playing the stubbornness. And we're in such a paradox. Well, even me is saying here, Zelensky is defending Ukraine with such a vigor. He's such a fluffy bunny in this regard. He's going to negotiations. He's slapping this drum, and he's going and going and going. But remember this tweet, as they say. I want to see what will happen in 2 weeks. I think Americans will be able to publish a couple of interesting investigations, after which Zelensky's public opinion or public position in Ukraine will start shifting. I'm sure there'll be some publications coming up to light very soon. And it'll be difficult to disprove those publications. So the nearest changes likely will look as follows. We are rolling as that Energizer bunny, slapping the plates, drumming the drum, saying that I will not give up, I will not surrender. And on him, there'll be a lot of pages with compromising material falling on his head, burying him alive in the eyes of his own people, in his own constituents. So out of all the idiotic options that could have been chosen, he picked an option to bite the hand that's feeding him, and he definitely will have to face the consequences of this. And they will be in the nearest time, in the nearest future. We will be seeing them, and we'll be discussing them live here. As usual, right, Alexey? So, to continue this topic about rare earth minerals, there have been several publications describing how both sides estimate the current situation. The United States presented Ukraine with a document about access to its natural resources, and almost nothing was offered in return. This was Zelensky's position, and he's saying he forbade his ministers to sign this accord because this agreement does not defend Ukraine's interest enough, and his decision to not accept this offer was called myopic by a high-ranking official of the White House. Before our stream, I managed to conduct a non-public interview and gather some opinions from people who know very well what natural resources of Ukraine currently are, how can we use them, what this business could be if we did sign this accord, and how United States in general were conducting this kind of politics in the 70s, in the 20th century, when similar principles were applied to other developing countries. So I was trying to do some homework, and even with configuration 50-50, but just to procure those rare earth minerals, one needs to spend a lot of money. So imagine that American companies are coming to Ukraine and start mining it. They would need to invest a lot of money to even get these minerals. And now in these conditions, when whatever you mine is being shared 50-50, either in proceeds or in mineral resources, this is as if we did not invest anything and still got 50% of what was mined. This is actually a very good deal, frankly speaking. Right, Nikolai, this is a very good deal, and from the point of view of Americans, this is actually a very rational deal, and they're actually a welcoming deal to Ukraine. In their point of view, it is a good offer. They're telling us, hey, you have these resources, you don't have enough technology or money to invest to dig them up. We can come over, we will invest in technology, in mining, we'll create jobs, we'll open a lot of things here. And by the way, we've been giving you money and weapons for 3 years, right? The way it was, right, but still we did. And we will continue supporting you. So that's why 50-50 with all our other baggage, we're actually doing charity here. But no, our mother did not grow us in Ukraine like this. Our patriotic position is against such an offer, says Zelensky. So in general, this offer is actually a welcoming offer to Ukraine. Because these guys whom I do like, Trump, Vance and Musk, see Ukraine as a natural resource country. We are not going in the same road with them. However, if they see us as partners and as allies, this is a different story. And now let's analyze this deal from this point of view. Whom do they see us as? Is it treating Ukraine as a partner, or is it treating it as the natural resource wallet? how I see that, I want to say this is a natural resource stash. But you're also bringing up a lot of other things. How savvy are we in legalese? How much can we support this deal? Right, we were dropping our resume for the last few years. And when we were asking why they're treating us so badly and our beautiful future, well, because 2 years ago, nobody wanted to sell us. Everybody saw how heroically we resisted Putin. They were shocked and they said, guys, you're fantastic. You will be our night watch. We'll create the walls, the satellite wall, the defense wall here will protect us from Russia with your hands. Then they saw that we're stealing their aid, what we're doing inside the country, that we have a essentially dictatorship regime now that is suppressing language and cultural groups and bussification, forced bussification of citizens to send them to fight on the front, and how we drain our resources in the toilet and how many of them get stolen. And having looked at that, our partnership qualities were estimated to be below the floor. Perhaps our human qualities are good, but as a partner, we're infantile kids who do not know how to turn their inner positive qualities into a capital. Hold the word, follow with agreements, follow long-range strategy. That's why they devaluated our status to a gray zone from a night watch. And after our failed counteroffensive, that actually was the status that they started to see us in. And then in February of last year, right, as those taxi drivers in New York are saying, everybody thinks that it's Trump and Vance who are so bad. This plan that is now being voiced was actually reviewed by Democrats in February of 24. And so that you understand it better, Trump did open that folder from the desk in the White House, put it on the table and said, guys, please follow through. And Europeans start to scream, well, no, we would never abandon Ukraine. Who do you think we are? You don't know how scary and dangerous Putin is. We'll continue fighting with him and use these natural resources. And he's asking, look at this document, who are these signatures on this paper? Are these the signatures of those heads of states who are gathering in Paris now with Macron? This is not a verbal agreement. This is a document signed and already negotiated, as some people who know that these details confirm. And with their personal signatures. You guys signed this a year ago with Biden administration. I'm just fulfilling what you agreed upon. There is not a single ounce of my own handwriting in this document. This was all agreed between you and Biden. And here's the story. So at first, we were trapped. We rushed to be trapped there. Then we could have behaved very differently in it. At first, we behaved fantastically. Then we drained it. Our leadership was so horrible that we drained all the resources, all the authority we had. And when we fell down so low that we are now being basically divided and shared 50-50. For them, it actually looks like a partnership deal. And I would say, yeah, it's not a bad deal for us. And instead, our president's people come out and jump and scream and say, no, it will not be like this. This is not enough. This is not good enough. Americans are actually quite shocked by our behavior. I was talking the day before yesterday with some people who have the inner knowledge on this situation. It just happened. They've seen it, and they've seen a lot of things in life, in Afghanistan and the other places in their political history. They were saying, they were so surprised. They were saying that we've seen Karzai, who was getting American investments, and the money were brought to him in bags, from which he actually was taking his own money and then sending the rest to Afghanistan for use, ended up being bags of two different colors, so he could just take his colored bag and the second bag was going to fund the country. They're saying, we've seen all that, but we cannot imagine that Zelensky can go even further with his degeneracy. And also, like these estimates, remember recently our glorious leader in Davos was saying that in the vicinity of Trump, there are a lot of people who misunderstand the real situation on the ground. We'll explain it to them. And now we have a new piece of news. He's saying that Kellogg is coming on the 29th, and I'll just bring him to the front. He will see what's happening. He will get teary-eyed, and they will give us everything that we ask. By the way, Alexey, Kellogg's daughter is in Kharkov, not even getting out of it. She is helping there. Right, so I guess they're imagining that F-35s will be flying around Ukraine in circles, and there'll be expeditionary division of Marines of 50,000 will be walking along the border with Russia. So I don't know which world they're living in. Well, okay. Let me say a few things about these money. This is actually supposedly a good offer to send them to some fund and increase the revenue of the country. And I want to understand that, to underline here, that our industrial politics in Ukraine for the last 30 years, we allowed some groups of physical persons, a rather small group of people, to mine our resources and to sell it as resources to the West, which essentially is what being offered to us now, to mine our resources at the West's expense and give them to the West. And by the way, it will be at their expense, and we don't need to pay back value-added taxes and other things. And it looks like it's rather profitable. Now, one can say that we can also take 50% of natural resources instead of taking money. We can take the resource and build our own processing industry. We can use some money, some funds from the West and rebuild that. But right, Nikolai, you're missing the point here. I'm laughing, but you know, Zelensky administration is acting in a very well-known paradigm for Americans, so they would understand it. They're saying this: you are asking us to accept your protection. You're asking us to accept 300 billion of your investments. You're asking us to accept reformed industry and your stabilization fund, but you're asking in a wrong tone. You need to ask us respectively. And, you know, that's, I mean, it's satire, but yeah, that's ridiculous. I guess they're not asking with enough respect. It's as if somebody was drowning, right? And drowning why? Because he did not listen to his friends. He was given a lot of billions for his yacht. He refused to follow certain rules, built it to his liking. Now the yacht is sinking, and investors here to save him. And he comes to the fellow who is drowning, and the fellow is barely underwater. He is already drowning. He's sending bubbles and like, you're asking bulk bulk without any respect, bulk bulk. And then he goes down, and then you can cue in the song of Near and Far, Forever You Are from Titanic. I thought that I saw everything in this life. But what our glorious administration is performing in this last week is exceeding even my imagination limits, how bold it could be. In Jewish language, there is a word chutzpah. And this is absolutely bold kind of action without any base. Okay, let's see how long this happy chutzpah can go for. And here, it's interesting to listen to Nebenzya, to Russian representative in the United Nations. Today, he rode the white horse to a tribune and started to send certain message. And his message was that Zelensky is not a legitimate president. Nobody in his surrounding administration should be allowed to represent the new Ukraine. And what else he said? I think I'll quote him here. So, President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, and his allies should not be playing any role in new Ukraine. That is what Vasily Nebenzya, Russian representative at the United Nations, declared at the meeting. He stated that Zelensky lost his leadership, official leadership position in May of last year, that he has no authority in the current Ukraine. And he said another thing I want to quote here. Again, quoting, "The countries of European Union and Great Britain are also non-negotiable and cannot be partaking in any agreement about Ukraine. Ukraine has lost Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye, and in the future they have to be a demilitarized country, not part of any alliance or bloc. Realization of the future destiny and path of Ukraine is to be put on the new powers that will be elected in Kiev." Now, why do you think he's out making these statements? Alexey, some observers said that they don't like this story, that Russians do not like the story of ceasefire and then conducting elections. No, Nikolai, they actually like this story. So what's the mechanics then? Well, let's ask the question. Why, all of a sudden, on the Security Council, Nebenzya is making these statements? Is he preparing some position, Alexei, for future negotiations? No, they can come and negotiate that. They already have 5 groups working behind the scenes on this between the United States and Russia. So, okay, why, Alexei, do you think he's making the statement? He's making the statement, Nikolai, to declare a position that will be discussed at these talks. He's showing that from the highest pulpit, this is what will be discussed. Do you think Zelensky can pressure over that agreement? And let's imagine there are 2 options, that it's maybe a treacherous Russian position and Trump is very much not in agreement with it, and he'll be fighting against it. Or the second option, that this position is actually coordinated, pre-coordinated between Russia and the United States, and we're just being told. So what do you think is more correct? Are they just giving us a statement, us, Europe, and Great Britain? I don't think it's agreed upon position, Alexei. No, Nikolai, you would not believe me, but it is a very, very likely and a pre-agreed position. That's why when I'm saying that catastrophe will be much worse than even the bravest of those who finally awakening in Ukraine, who were not listening to us for the last year and a half. Even now, the most skeptical ones cannot fully grasp how far did we fall and what will we have to dig ourselves out of. And Nebenzya is generally outlining the parameters of that deal. Because Americans cannot come with this like this. They are more diplomatic. They're saying, of course, we'll hear out Europe, we'll hear the Brits. Ukraine, of course, will be participating on every stage. But Zelensky is running around saying that I'll be nearby, but I will not come to these negotiations. Personally, I will not. Just like in that anecdote about one little noble bird who wanted to fly directly to the sun. Do you know why Zelensky is refusing to participate in these negotiations? Because he understands what will be negotiated and that he will have to sign it. The fact that he is somehow participating in that schema voiced by Nebenzya, he doesn't like it. And now it's just a matter of how soon will his end come, because nobody will be handling him in white gloves after he had spat in the deal that the United States offered him, which, by the way, was also pre-agreed upon. So now I think there is already some pre-agreed situation between Trump and Putin. And one thing, if we were Israel, who would have, 50% of its own armor and ammo manufactured, that gets 130% of volunteers to occupy each military position being offered, that would be a different story. Not in Ukraine. So if you think that chutzpah will help you, it won't.
And for me, indicative news is that bookmakers started to accept bets that a ceasefire will happen in 2025. So I want to address you a question. Do you believe that bookmakers, with all the positive predictions, they do want to lose their money on this? Evil New York taxi drivers are insisting that by the 30th of April, the ceasefire will happen, and that Trump did mention that those who would be blocking this process will probably not find themselves in a beneficial position. So let's replace the beam of 2-3 weeks to a couple months, 7 or 8 weeks, right? So we'll see that in a very short term. And by the way, there will be also another meeting of leaders, so-called, that work group that Saudi Arabia meeting is preparing, is just preparing for a meeting of Putin and Trump. Zelensky categorically refused to participate in the process group preparing that meeting, so he will not be present at this meeting between Putin and Trump, and therefore will be just presented with agreements that they will discuss and achieve between themselves, and that's what he's resisting. And he is positioning himself to be outside of that solution, as it was made without me. It has nothing to do with me. And mostly, I advise our listeners to pay attention if you want to figure out the trends. Note one thing, that neither Zelensky nor anyone of his team, and that's what Nebenzya voiced at the United Nations. I hope nobody thinks that he's self-propelled individuals who can choose what to speak. So nobody thinks that a Russian representative at the United Nations can say something that is not agreed upon during Trump's and Putin's meetings that can dislodge these agreements. So That's the peculiarity of this situation. That's it. And I can tell you a little more here. If you think or hope that all these people, Zelensky and ones in his orbit, that they will maybe retain their power after the elections, or at least go to the election race and then be dislodged at the end of it. Evil New York drivers are saying that after a ceasefire, this whole team will be gone. They will have to bow down and say, I have to resign. And they're practically out of other options, and that's why they're more upset. That's why they're making all this noise. They're trying to put Europe, Great Britain on their side, and they're screaming how patriotic and defensive they are for Ukraine. And I'm trying to differentiate these two things here. Good thing that they're trying to defend Ukraine's interest. Bad thing that they're doing it to also defend their own interests. And even worse, that they actually were the ones who led us to the place where we are. And in a very short term, we may find ourselves in an interesting situation when, oops, and there is no Zelensky regime, how it is called sometimes. And it could be Stefanchuk from Duma, or could be some other transitional power, and the elections are already on the calendar, and nobody's grabbing anybody and throwing into the buses to go to the front. And you can live through 6 or 8 months of that before the elections. So we are on the verge of rather grandiose of events. And everything that's happening is for the better right now. And what's happening in Ukraine from the side of our presidency is an agony, which is not even funny for me anymore. It's more, I feel pity for them. Their attempts to explain, their attempts to position themselves in the right angle. All these stories that Russian UAV that hit the sarcophagus of Chernobyl nuclear station, and everybody in Munich was supposed to be really pissed. Nobody even blipped the radar when they heard about that, because they do understand what Zelensky is talking about right now. And frankly, the last thing he can do, or maybe the better thing he can do, he can pack his bags and say, well, I got you to the ceasefire. Please don't judge me. I did try my best for Ukraine, and I think our population, our people would have forgiven him for his sincerity. But if he will continue stubbornly grasping onto power, it will likely end pretty badly for him, and very good for Ukraine. So we are observing the last few weeks, maybe a month, a couple months, but I think weeks, of this circus that is happening. And all these talks about the possible threat of attack on Ukraine from Belarus that Trump already had to react today. And he's saying that I do not believe that Russia is going to attack. In Western modeling, they do have a scenario when Russia is attacking Ukraine, but frankly, not in the near 3 years, and not us, maybe one of the Baltic states are near it, but not Ukraine. They're not naive. They understand what is happening now between Putin and the Trump administration. What we're talking about is that they understand that Zelensky brought the country to a catastrophe, and a skilled woodcutter's tool will now be separating Zelensky's team destiny from Ukraine's destiny. How Mueller said in that movie that I like to quote, 17 Moments of Spring, do not mix the interests of Führer and the interests of Germany. They are two different things. That's why there'll be a lot of agony and attempts to present it as care about Ukraine, and maybe some of it will be about Ukraine. We cannot remove at least one of these motivations, that some of it may be actually caring for Ukraine, but we still need to understand the picture at large, what's happening. All right, Alex, let's talk about the subjectivity of Europe, about the subjectness of Europe in this regard, because Zelensky statements are also relying on statements of some British and German and other leaders in EU. But however, it doesn't look like these signals have any serious power behind them. And that's one of the angles. On the other hand, I remember your estimations of the European processes, European military complex. You were mentioning that there will be some decisions made, and Europe might surprise Ukraine and the world, and some strategic decisions are already made. Oh, indeed, they will be making European army with their best effort. They have no other options. Trump did tell them that if you will continue resisting and not spending 5% of your GDP on NATO, suddenly you may discover that there are no American soldiers in Europe, and you're dealing with threats that coming not only from Russia, by yourself. Macron is a big proponent of European army, and they instituted a position of commissar of that army. It's relatively relevant to a position of a minister in EU. There are talks that Britain and some other countries will join, even perhaps Switzerland and Austria might, who have been neutral for a long time. So they've been postponing this decision for a while, but now, having seen the situation, the war in Ukraine, they understand that they do need some troops. And there will be some processes happening. Zelensky already had time to state that you guys do need European army, and we will definitely help you. You know our strengths. And I smiled at this moment. I can only see Austrian, German, French general who are gathering together and saying, the guys who are really missed in our army are Ukrainian bussified troops who are forcefully conscripted to the front. This will be the core of security of our Ukraine, of our European Union. I have a friend who is actually now being trained in a training facility of a recruiting center. And in the last month, they lost 3 people. Somebody died yesterday from a heart attack. They forced them to wear armor, helmets, and all the heavy stuff and run a race. The person needed medicine for his heart condition, and it was ignored, and he just laid down on the ground and died. And there were a couple more that I think it was epilepsy or something. But yeah, just speaking at large. So this is the quality of our troops right now. We also have the quality of generals who are losing the 20th township in the same fashion over and over again. So they probably graduated from their universities or whatever they studied without even coming back to conscious. And you can't even imagine how we train our future officers and generals these days. They gather them in a training facility and they're telling them roughly this: these are the books you guys need to study. And of course, they also get the pitch that Soviet stuff was shitty, that NATO is our shining guiding light. And when somebody raises a hand and asks, can we do some play exercise? Can we train? Can we do some war games? He's basically getting shot down saying, no, everything is in the books, you don't need that. This is horrible, because the whole process of military training should be, the pinnacle of it is training. Because you need to understand the map, you need to understand why these documents are telling you to do certain things in a certain fashion. You need to be able to correlate that with things on the field or on the map. And moreover, how do you pick the right leaders in the army? You start playing these war games. If you're playing the lower level at the platoon commander, you can play that on a territory. If you're playing on the higher level as a battalion commander, and you can play it on the maps. And you need to prevail in a current situation, in certain scenario, and then the best ones will also be thrown a test to play alone against the rest of the peers. So that's how you properly train your officers. We don't have that. We will have to rebuild all this. Do you think Western generals are aware of these peculiarities of our training or not? I'm reading the Telegraph right now. NATO is splitting ways with Ukraine because of the tactics of the Soviet times, and British Defense Ministry accusing Zelensky's troops in spending expensive equipment in futile tactics on the battlefront. So they have a lot of qualms, a lot of questions about Ukrainian behavior on the front. And you can see with big red letters, we will of course accept Ukraine into NATO. Oh, I love this new feature of the chat. This is Skype, this is not us, Alexey. Yeah, we will accept you to a European forces, to European army. We will not, we cannot accept you into NATO ranks, but we will make you a part of EU forces, because Zelensky promised that, the leading world-class ruler of Ukraine. And they'll start cleaning the surroundings of Trump vicinity from Russian agents, and Russia will be at bay, and Ukraine's army will be fully accepted into the army of EU. Right? This is even that special effects that I keep toying with. What's that? A heart? Anything else? You can show a like and it will probably do something with it. I think it's Skype that's behaving it like this. So yeah, if you show a hand like this, that usually makes a bubble with the like, oh, I guess we're sanctioned now by the equipment. Well, even if that is happening, that we do have a conflict between NATO and Ukraine, confirmed by British sources in the open, in the media, then, okay, we say everything Soviet is horrible, we understand that position, but apparently NATO stuff is also not exactly fitting to us. We are tentatively presenting it to be paramount, but we apparently have a lot of issues with it. Exactly. And we do need to fight like Petlura promised us. That some people trump it here as a hero in Ukraine, to get so confused that you end up executing the best of your officers, and then you adopt support from Poland or the West, and with their troops you get back to Ukraine, and then you get to Kiev, and then you see that nobody wants to stand for you, and then you run away from a couple thousand Bolsheviks. Because when you get a talented officer like Volovchan, who actually helped to occupy Crimea, he will be executed. Oh yeah, he was used first to topple Skoropadsky, and then he was later executed. That's an interesting historic perspective. I like what Strugatsky wrote in their book. We don't need smart ones, we need trusty ones. The problem is that you do downshift, downselect for the trusted ones, but then you start asking them as if they were the smart ones. And that is where things start to break. End of the first hour. And do not forget to please click like and subscribe.